The late summer of 1943 witnessed a technological ambush that shattered centuries of established naval doctrine and sent a shockwave of panic through the Allied High Command. For generations, the battleship had reigned as the undisputed sovereign of the seas, a floating citadel of thick steel armor plates and heavy artillery designed to absorb immense punishment. While the rising threat of conventional aerial dive bombers and torpedo planes had forced navies to ring their fleets with dense nests of anti-aircraft guns, tactical thinkers still believed that a well-maneuvered warship operating within a coordinated defensive screen could repel any standard air assault. That comfortable assumption evaporated in a matter of seconds on the afternoon of September 9, 1943, in the waters of the Strait of Bonifacio. Following the Italian armistice with the Allies, the pride of the Italian Royal Navy, the state-of-the-art Littorio-class battleship Roma, was steaming south to surrender her guns to the British at Malta. Under the command of Admiral Carlo Bergamini, the massive 46,000-ton warship was flanked by her sister ship Italia and a powerful escort of cruisers and destroyers. Above them, cruising at an altitude of over 5,000 meters, far beyond the reach of standard Italian anti-aircraft fire, flew a squadron of Dornier Do 217 bombers belonging to the Luftwaffe's elite Kampfgeschwader 100. As the Italian crews watched the distant speck of a single falling bomb detach from a German aircraft, they braced for a conventional near-miss or a standard high-altitude impact on their heavily armored decks. Instead, the falling object did something impossible. It corrected its course in mid-air, banking sharply with fluid precision to track the battleship's desperate evasive maneuvers. Traveling at near supersonic terminal velocity, the heavy ordnance struck the Roma on her starboard side, slicing through her thick deck armor as if it were sheet metal before detonating deep within her engine rooms. Minutes later, a second guided bomb plunged through the forward superstructure, igniting the primary magazine of her 90mm anti-aircraft ammunition and her massive 15-inch gun turrets. The resulting thermonuclear-like explosion ripped the battleship in two, capsizing the vessel and sending Admiral Bergamini, 2 ammunition train crews, and over 1,300 Italian sailors to a watery grave. It was a catastrophic, instantaneous execution that left the surviving crew members on the nearby Italia in absolute terror. They realized they were no longer fighting conventional gravity-bound bombs, but a terrifying new species of intelligent, remote-controlled death. Only 2 weeks earlier, on August 27, 1943, a similar mechanical spectre had claimed its first victim in the Bay of Biscay. A squadron of Dornier bombers armed with the smaller, rocket-propelled Henschel HS-293 glide bomb descended upon an Allied anti-submarine patrol group. The British sloop HMS Egret was struck amidships by a fast-moving, winged projectile that detached from a bomber, ignited a bright rocket motor, and navigated directly into her hull. The warhead exploded with devastating force, triggering her depth charge magazines and destroying the vessel in less than 40 seconds, making the Egret the first ship in human history to be sunk by a guided missile in combat. Within days, the Allied naval forces at Salerno, Italy, found themselves under relentless siege by these remote-controlled guided weapons. The legendary British Queen Elizabeth-class battleship HMS Warspite, which had survived the savage gunfire of the Battle of Jutland and the heavy bombing of the Mediterranean campaign, was struck by a single Fritz X guided bomb that tore through 6 decks, blew a massive hole in her double bottom, and knocked out her entire boiler system, leaving her a dead, drifting hulk that had to be towed to Gibraltar. The sudden, devastating deployment of the Fritz X and Henschel HS-293 threw Allied planning into a chaotic frenzy of emergency conferences and immediate tactical restructuring. The realization that a single, medium-altitude German bomber could stand off at a safe distance and accurately drop armor-piercing or high-explosive guided munitions onto maneuvering warships threatened to render amphibious invasions like Operation Avalanche impossible. The Allies had built their entire invasion strategy around close-in naval gunfire support provided by battleships, cruisers, and destroyers operating near the coast. If those capital ships could be picked off from 5 miles away by invisible pilots steering bombs with joysticks, the entire offensive in Europe stood on the brink of a bloody, logistical disaster. This technological surprise demanded an immediate, exhaustive investigation into the physical design, guidance systems, and vulnerabilities of these German weapons, launching a high-stakes intelligence and electronic warfare race that would ultimately decide the battle for the Mediterranean. To understand the sudden lethality of this new aerial threat, we must examine the physical anatomy and mechanical design of the two primary guided weapons in the Luftwaffe's late-war arsenal, the Ruhrstahl SD 1400X, commonly known as the Fritz X, and the Henschel HS 293. Both of these innovative systems were born from the realization that conventional high-altitude bombing was mathematically ineffective against moving, armored maritime targets. Throughout 1940 and 1941, German bomber pilots discovered that dropping standard gravity bombs from safe altitudes resulted in hit rates of less than 1%, while flying lower to conduct precision dive bombing exposed their twin-engine aircraft to devastating anti-aircraft fire and shipboard flak. In response, German armaments researchers began developing remote-controlled munitions that could combine the heavy, armor-penetrating power of standard artillery shells with the responsive maneuverability of a piloted aircraft. These parallel development programs produced two highly distinct designs tailored for entirely different combat roles, representing the world's first true separation between armor-piercing guided glide bombs and light, standoff anti-ship missiles. The Fritz X was designed by Dr. Max Kramer at the Ruhrstahl company as a specialized battleship killer. It was built around the heavy steel body of a standard SD 1400 armor-piercing bomb, which weighed 1,400 kilograms and contained a massive 320 kilogram explosive warhead designed to pierce up to 130 millimeters of deck armor before detonating. Kramer added four small stubby wings to the center of the heavy steel cylinder, forming a distinct cruciform shape that provided the heavy projectile with just enough aerodynamic lift to glide rather than tumble through the atmosphere. The key to the Fritz X's maneuverability was its highly unique tail unit, which housed a complex system of solenoid-driven vibrating spoilers, known as Kramer spoilers. Unlike conventional aircraft which used hinged, drag-inducing control flaps like ailerons and elevators, Kramer's design utilized small, comb-like metal spoilers that rapidly vibrated up and down through the airflow at the rear of the bomb. By momentarily interrupting the air currents passing over the tail fin, these spoilers generated subtle, highly responsive aerodynamic forces that could gently nudge the massive 3,000-pound projectile up, down, left, or right in mid-flight, allowing a skilled operator to guide its heavy armor-piercing nose directly onto the deck of a maneuvering warship. In contrast to the heavy, unpowered Fritz X, the Henschel HS 293 was designed by Dr. Herbert Wagner as a rocket-powered, standoff glide bomb meant for attacking lightly armored merchant vessels, troop transports, and destroyers. The HS 293 was essentially a miniature, unmanned aircraft with a wingspan of 3.1 meters, complete with a conventional tailplane, symmetrical wooden wings, and a fuselage carrying a heavy 500-kilogram high-explosive warhead. Because their weapon was intended to be released from a safe distance of up to 8 kilometers away from the target ship's anti-aircraft ring, it required its own independent propulsion system to bridge the gap. To achieve this, Wagner suspended a Walter HWK 109-507 liquid propellant rocket motor beneath the fuselage. This compact rocket engine ran on a volatile combination of T-Stoff, which was concentrated hydrogen peroxide, and C-Stoff, a hydrazine hydrate and methanol mixture, producing 590 kilograms of thrust for approximately 12 seconds after launch. This short, intense burst of rocket power accelerated the glide bomb to over 400 kilometers per hour, launching it ahead of the parent bomber and giving the pilot plenty of time to visually align their weapon with the target. Despite their pioneering engineering, both the Fritz X and the Henschel HS 293 shared a critical limitation that ultimately became their operational Achilles heel: they were entirely unguided during their initial release and lacked any form of onboard automatic homing sensors. There were no radar receivers, infrared seekers, or computerized guidance systems inside these early smart bombs. They were completely blind and dumb on their own. Instead, they relied entirely on the human eyes and manual reflexes of the bombardier sitting inside the cockpit of the parent bomber. This design philosophy, known as manual command to line of sight, meant that the physical weapon was merely an extension of the pilot's hand. If the wireless link between the pilot and the missile could be broken, or if the pilot's view of the weapon could be obscured for even a few seconds, the advanced projectile would instantly revert into a useless, unguided block of falling steel. This reliance on a continuous, uninterrupted stream of human input and wireless data created a massive, highly vulnerable target for Allied scientists, who immediately realized that the best way to defeat the German smart bombs was not to shoot down the missiles themselves, but to disrupt the invisible electromagnetic link that bound them to their creators. The invisible nervous system of Germany's guided weapon campaign was the Kehl-Straßburg radio control link, a pioneering wireless command transmission system that represented the dawn of modern electronic telemetry and remote control. Developed by Telefunken, this high-frequency radio array was composed of two main components: the FUG-203 Kehl transmitter, installed inside the parent bomber, and the FUG-230 Strasbourg receiver, packed tightly into the rear tail cone of the Fritz X or Henschel HS-293. Working in perfect synchronization, these units formed an electromagnetic tether that spanned up to 10 kilometers, allowing a single bombardier to guide a falling bomb with a high degree of precision. The physical interface for this control loop was a small, dual-axis joystick, known to the German crews as the Naval, which was mounted adjacent to the bombardier's primary sighting station. When the bombardier nudged the joystick forward, backward, or to either side, his hand movements were converted into electric currents that were transmitted across a highly specific frequency band, transforming a mechanical motion into a series of coded radio waves. To protect the command link from simple interference and to allow multiple bombers to operate in the same airspace without cross-controlling each other's missiles, the Kehl-Straßburg system operated on a carrier frequency band between 48 and 50 MHz, divided into 18 distinct channels. Within this narrow VHF band, Telefunken engineers utilized a sophisticated multitone amplitude modulation system to encode the joystick commands. Instead of sending raw analog signals, the FUG-203 Kehl transmitter superimposed specific, highly stable audio frequency tones onto the radio carrier wave. To command a pitch correction, such as nudging the missile up or down, the transmitter injected tones of either 1000 Hz or 1500 Hz. For your corrections, directing the missile to steer left or right, the system used much higher audio tones of 8000 Hz and 12,000 Hz. Inside the missile's tail, the FUG-230 Strasbourg receiver captured the incoming composite radio wave, stripped away the high-frequency carrier signal, and routed the remaining audio tones through a series of highly sensitive bandpass filters. These filters detected which specific tones were active and routed the corresponding electrical pulses directly to the solenoid-driven Kramer spoilers or the elevator actuators, translating the radio tones back into immediate mechanical steering forces. While the electronic telemetry was incredibly advanced for its time, the tracking of the missile was entirely visual and relied on the human optical limits of the bombardier. Because their weapon was released at a distance of several miles, the pilot and bombardier in the parent aircraft had to visually monitor both the target ship and the fast-moving missile simultaneously to maintain the correct line of sight. To make the falling projectile visible against the dark blue background of the sea or the blinding glare of the Mediterranean sun, both the Fritz X and the Henschel HS-293 were fitted with powerful, burning tracking flares in their tail sections. These tail flares, which ignited automatically upon release, contained a slow-burning phosphorus compound that emitted a brilliant, intense red or green flame, creating a highly visible point of light that the bombardier could track through his stabilized optical sight. In some late-war night-fighting variants, these chemical flares were replaced by high-intensity electric lamps, known as Kugellampen, which used colored lenses to project a sharp, focused beam of light backward toward the parent aircraft while remaining hidden from the anti-aircraft gunners on the target ship. This manual command to line-of-sight loop required an extraordinary degree of concentration, steady hand-eye coordination, and rigorous training from the German bombardiers. The operator had to constantly adjust his joystick inputs to keep the glowing red tail flare of the missile aligned perfectly with the target ship throughout the entire 15 to 30 second flight duration. If the bombardier overcorrected his joystick movements, or if he misjudged the wind drift and the speed of the target, the missile would rapidly enter a series of violent, uncontrollable oscillations and crash harmlessly into the water. This human-in-the-loop system meant that the physical weapon and its control telemetry were entirely codependent. There was no backup system, no automatic stabilizers, and no safety override. Telefunken's invisible radio wire was a masterpiece of analog engineering, but its heavy reliance on a narrow, easily accessible frequency band and a series of simple, unencrypted audio frequency control tones left it highly vulnerable to detection, interception, and electronic disruption by Allied intelligence officers, who were already listening in on the radio waves of the Mediterranean. While popular accounts of the German guided bomb campaign often emphasize the terrifying speed and precision of the falling projectiles, they frequently ignore the tactical crisis this technology imposed on the parent aircraft. The cold, mechanical reality of manual command to line of sight was that the human bombardier was physically chained to the weapon from the moment of release until the instant of detonation. To successfully guide a Fritz X or Henschel HS-293, the parent bomber, typically a twin-engine Dornier Do 217 or a massive, notoriously unstable four-engine Heinkel He-177, had to fly in an exceptionally rigid, predictable, and defenseless trajectory. Once the bomb was released, the pilot could not bank, dive, climb, or perform any evasive maneuvers to avoid incoming fire. Doing so would instantly disrupt the bombardier's optical alignment, causing him to lose sight of both the target and the missile's trailing flare, resulting in an immediate and total failure of the mission. The parent aircraft was forced to act as a slow-moving, non-evading transmitter platform, hanging suspended in the sky like a giant, stationary target. This operational vulnerability was further compounded by the specific altitude and speed requirements of the weapon release profile. To give the heavy Fritz X enough time and space to gather the aerodynamic velocity needed for its vibrating tail spoilers to steer effectively, the parent bomber had to drop the weapon from an altitude of at least 5,000 meters, while flying at a slow, stable speed of around 350 km per hour. For the lighter Henschel HS-293, the release profile required a similarly stable approach at medium altitudes. Once the missile was in flight, the bombardier had to stare intently through his optical sight, slowly manipulating the delicate joystick to keep the glowing red phosphorus tail flare of the bomb superimposed directly over the silhouette of the enemy ship. For the 15, 20, or even 30 seconds of the bomb's descent, the German aircrew were essentially flying blind to their own survival, unable to scan the skies for Allied fighters or react to the dark puffs of heavy anti-aircraft flak exploding around their unarmored fuselage. This rigid flight profile turned the German bomber squadrons into easy prey for Allied shipboard gunners and combat air patrols. In the early stages of the Mediterranean campaign, when Allied air cover was thin and shipboard anti-aircraft radar was still developing, the Dorniers of Kampfgeschwader 100 could operate with a relative degree of freedom. However, as the Allies established absolute air superiority over the landing beaches of Salerno and Anzio, the tactical landscape became lethal for the Luftwaffe. Allied combat air patrols, flying fast, heavily armed Supermarine Spitfires and North American P-51 Mustangs, quickly learned to identify the slow, high-altitude flight paths of the German missile-carrying bombers. If a Spitfire intercepted a Dornier Do 217 during its critical guidance phase, the German bomber had no hope of survival. Its pilot could either break away to save his crew, instantly sending his minion Reichsmark-guided bomb crashing uselessly into the sea, or he could hold his course and accept immediate destruction under the heavy machine guns and 20mm cannons of the Allied fighters. Consequently, this extreme vulnerability to interceptor aircraft and heavy shipboard flak severely limited the operational utility of the Fritz X and HS-293, restricting their use to uncontested airspaces or brief, high-risk dusk and dawn operations. Their weapons could not be deployed in poor weather, as the bombardier required absolute cloud-free visibility to see the target ship and the tracking flare, nor could they be used in areas defended by dense, modern Allied fighter screens. What had initially appeared to the Allied High Command as an unstoppable, futuristic superweapon was rapidly unmasked as a highly fragile and specialized system that could only function under very specific, idealized tactical conditions. Once the Allies recognized that they did not need to shoot down the fast-moving guided bombs, but could simply shoot down or scatter the defenseless parent aircraft before they could guide their payloads to the target, the deadly efficiency of the German smart bomb campaign began to precipitously decline. As the devastating impact of the German guided weapons became clear in late 1943, a fascinating, highly persistent rumor began to spread like wildfire through the lower decks of the Allied navies. According to this legendary maritime myth, which was actively discussed by panicking sailors and junior officers alike, standard electric shavers, such as those manufactured by Schick, Remington, or Sunbeam, could be used as an emergency countermeasure to blind the German smart bombs. The story went that if a ship detected an incoming Henschel HS-293 or Fritz X, sailors would rush to their quarters, plug their electric shavers into the ship's alternating current outlets, and hold them near the radio receivers, hoping that the wideband electromagnetic static generated by the tiny, unshielded electric motors would scramble the German guidance frequencies. While this colorful tale was widely circulated and provided a significant psychological boost to the morale of terrified crews who felt completely helpless against these high-altitude attacks, modern scientific analysis and military records have thoroughly debunked it as a harmless, albeit effective, morale-boosting urban legend. In reality, the minuscule electromagnetic emissions from a civilian electric razor operating inside a steel-walled cabin possessed nowhere near the signal strength or directional focus required to propagate through the ship's heavy structure, reach the sky, and overpower the highly sensitive, military-grade Telefunken receivers of a missile gliding hundreds of meters overhead. The actual battle to blind the German guided bombs was waged not with electric shavers, but with a highly sophisticated, multi-million-dollar electronic shield designed by British and American electrical engineers working under conditions of extreme secrecy. The first major breakthrough in this silent electromagnetic war occurred when Allied technicians captured intact, unexploded specimens of both the Fritz X and the Henschel HS-293, alongside their FUG-230 Strasbourg radio receivers. By analyzing the internal circuitry, vacuum tubes, and bandpass filters of these captured units at the Royal Aircraft Establishment and the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory, scientists identified the exact frequency band, 48 to 50 MHz, and the specific audio frequency modulation tones, 1000, 1500, 8000, and 12,000 Hz, used to steer the weapons. Armed with this invaluable technical telemetry, engineers rapidly constructed the world's first operational electronic jamming systems designed specifically to disrupt radio-guided ordnance. The vanguard of this electronic shield was the British Type 650 transmitter, a high-power, broad-spectrum radio jammer that was hastily installed on Royal Navy destroyers, cruisers, and fleet escorts. The Type 650 was designed to continuously sweep back and forth across the 48 to 50 MHz carrier band, blasting out high-intensity radio noise that mimicked the German Kehl-Straßburg signal. When a German bomber released a guided bomb, the British jammer would flood the atmosphere with overwhelming electromagnetic static, drowning out the parent aircraft's commands and causing the missile's FUG-230 receiver to lose its lock. Simultaneously, the U.S. Navy deployed its own advanced shipboard jamming system, designated the XCJ, which was later refined into the highly effective airborne AN/ARQ-8 jamming system. Instead of merely transmitting random noise, these advanced American systems were designed to actively inject fraudulent control tones into the missile's receiver, spoofing the guidance circuitry and causing the control surfaces to flutter violently or lock into a hard, full-limit deflection, sending the multi-million-mark projectile diving uncontrollably into the sea. In addition to this invisible electronic warfare, the Allies developed highly effective tactical countermeasures that exploited the visual limitations of the manual command-to-line-of-sight guidance loop. Because the German bombardier required an absolute, uninterrupted line of sight to track the missile's tail flare on the target ship, the Royal Navy and U.S. Navy began employing rapid, high-volume chemical smoke generators on their warships. The moment an incoming German bomber squadron was detected on radar, the fleet would lay down a dense, impenetrable white blanket of chlorosulfonic acid or oil fog smoke, completely shrouding the maneuvering ships from view. Blinded by the sudden wall of smoke, the German bombardier could no longer see his target or the missile's tracking flare, forcing him to steer blindly or abandon control altogether, causing the advanced guided weapons to splash harmlessly into the water. Through this powerful combination of high-power VHF radio jammers, deceptive tone spoofers, and low-tech tactical smoke screens, the Allies successfully neutralized Germany's technological edge, transforming the terrifying smart bombs of 1943 into highly unreliable, easily blinded relics of industrial overreach by the summer of 1944. The final defeat of the Luftwaffe's guided bomb campaign provides a sobering strategic postmortem on the limitations of technological innovation when divorced from industrial scale and air superiority. Between August 1943 and August 1944, the Fritz X and Henschel HS-293 had achieved some of the most spectacular tactical victories in the history of aerial warfare, sinking or severely damaging dozens of major Allied warships, including battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. Yet, despite these terrifying early successes, the entire guided bomb program was practically wiped out in less than a year, leaving no measurable impact on the ultimate outcome of the war. Once the Allies secured absolute, uncontested air superiority over Western Europe and the Mediterranean, and once their electronic countermeasures fully matured, the German guided weapons were stripped of their lethality. The program proved that a highly advanced weapon system is only as effective as the industrial and air platform that carries it into battle. Without the means to protect the parent bombers and secure the skies, Germany's pioneering smart bombs were merely expensive, sophisticated toys built for a theater of war that no longer existed. The primary strategic bottleneck of the Fritz X and Henschel HS-293 was their reliance on highly specialized, handcrafted electronic components and volatile rocket fuels during a period of total industrial collapse. While the United States was mass-producing hundreds of thousands of standard, good enough gravity bombs and packing their cargo holds with reliable, standardized munitions, Germany was struggling to assemble a few dozen highly complex, hand-wired FUG 230 receivers and liquid propellant rocket engines. The delicate vacuum tubes, precision stabilization gyros, and silver-plated contacts required for the Kehl-Straßburg radio link consumed immense amounts of skilled labor, precious metals, and highly specialized manufacturing facilities. Furthermore, the Allied bombing campaign against German electronics hubs and the critical Goldschmidt and Telefunken factories created catastrophic production bottlenecks, forcing engineers to frequently substitute inferior materials that compromised the reliability of the guidance systems. By the time of the Allied landings in Normandy in June 1944, the Luftwaffe could only field a handful of missile-carrying bombers, which were swiftly annihilated by Allied fighters before they could even reach their release coordinates. However, while the Fritz X and Henschel HS-293 failed to save the Third Reich from destruction, their underlying engineering legacy survived the ashes of World War II to fundamentally reshape the future of global naval warfare. During the immediate post-war period, both the United States and the Soviet Union eagerly captured intact German guided bombs, technical blueprints, and the pioneering scientists who designed them, incorporating this captured telemetry directly into their own nascent missile development programs. Max Kramer's vibrating spoiler designs and Herbert Wagner's rocket propulsion concepts served as the direct technological ancestors for the first generation of Cold War anti-ship missiles and precision-guided glide munitions. The basic aerodynamic and guidance principles pioneered by the Luftwaffe in 1943 were refined and digitized, leading to the creation of iconic modern weapon systems like the French Exocet, the American Harpoon, and the sophisticated, long-range supersonic anti-ship missiles deployed by modern global powers today. In the final analysis, the story of the Fritz X and the Henschel HS-293 is a compelling study in the prematic birth of a technological revolution. Dr. Max Kramer and Dr. Herbert Wagner had correctly identified the future of maritime warfare. They realized that the era of unguided gravity bombs and close-range naval gun duels was coming to an end, and that the future belonged to precision-guided standoff weapons. Yet, the analog technology of 1943, with its unencrypted VHF radio links, fragile vacuum tubes, and complete reliance on a defenseless parent bomber and the manual reflexes of a human operator, was simply too immature to withstand the crushing weight of Allied industrial production and electronic countermeasures. The Fritz X and HS-293 were a terrifying, prematic window into the future of naval combat, proving that while a nation can invent the future in a laboratory, it cannot win a war of attrition without the industrial capacity to mass produce and protect those inventions on the battlefield.